Before we start, I do want to mention, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box with your name and your organization, and we will be starting soon. Okay, great. So I think we're all set to start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Youth and Development Workgroup event, Understanding Systems Change for Positive Youth Outcomes. My name is Malvika Randive. I'm the program coordinator for Society for International Development Washington chapter. And before we start with the event, I just kind of want to go through some housekeeping rules that we have for the event today, as well as a little bit about SID-W. So for those that are unfamiliar with SID-W, SID Washington is the largest and the most active chapter for the Society for International Development, an international network that was founded in 1957 to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. SID Washington serves as a global town square for the international development community, bringing together people from diverse organizations, disciplines, and career stages in a neutral, independent forum to share information and discuss important issues and challenges facing our community, as we are doing today. There are 3 different ways that you can get involved with SID Washington. You can visit us at sidw.org to see what our upcoming events are. You can sign up for a weekly newsletter, information for which you will also find on our website, or you can follow us on social media. We also have a poll that we've instituted just to learn a little more about yourself. I will be launching the poll now. Just gonna give everyone a few seconds to answer. It helps us understand what our participants, who our participants are and where they're joining us from. Great. So thank you for participating. I see that a lot of our participants are SID-W members. Thank you for joining us again if you've been to our events before. Another thing that we want to ensure that you're able to participate in is filling in our post-event survey. This is important because we want to receive feedback from you on how we can, further improve our events and also account for different things that you would want to see in SID-W events as well. A few things to note: this event will be recorded and it will be distributed through our social media channels and our website. We also have live transcription closed captioning available today, and for those that wish to use it, you can enable it through your personal settings if you click on more. For questions, we please ask that you submit your questions to the chat box. You can also mention your name and your organization when you submit your questions so we can recognize who you are. And our moderators and speakers will attend to those questions during the Q&A portion of the event. And with that, I will be turning it over to Christy, our co-chair for the Youth and Development Work Group, to introduce our speakers for today.
Thanks, Malvika. Thank you so much to you and your team for helping out in development of this session. We really appreciate it. Just like to say welcome to everybody. So glad you could join us today. I think you're in for a really interesting discussion, and we look forward to hearing from you all at the end in the Q&A section with your experiences and questions. I'm Christy Olenek. I'm the Vice President of Technical Services at Making Sense International. And as Malvika said, one of the co-chairs, along with my colleague, Matthew Bremen, for the Youth Working Group. It's our pleasure to introduce you to our speakers today. We have 2 of our friends and colleagues from the Youth Systems Collaborative, Ms. Bonnie Politz and Dr. Claire Gnatowski. And we also have our new friend, Anna Mehta from the Global Opportunity Youth Network, who will be talking about systems change from the youth perspective. And with that, I will pass it to Bonnie, who's going to get us started talking about the Youth Systems Framework. And I also just want to say congratulations to the Youth Systems Collaborative for their recent article, Building Youth Infrastructure, Early Lessons from the Youth Systems Collaborative. So Bonnie, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. My name is Bonnie Politz. I am sitting here in Washington, D.C., and excited to be a part of this. We're here to talk about youth systems, not programs, not projects. We're trying to really uplift and learn and share more information about what's going on around systems change. So we have a couple objectives for the day and for this event. We're going to be sharing a framework that reflects on the systems dimensions of what's going on with youth around the world, that focuses on true, sustainability and local ownership to keep things going. We'll be doing sharing a little bit about the recent article that Christy just mentioned that was in the Journal of Youth Development. And we'll also be learning about experiences from the Global Opportunity Youth Network. So we can go to the next slide. So just a bit of background. Between 2003 and 2012, USAID supported a funding mechanism called EQIP3, which focused on out-of-school youth globally. And it was a cross-sectoral, trying to really learn cross-sectorally what was going on and what could be done to really improve outcomes for particularly out-of-school youth. Another step in that process, after learning about that between 2003 and 2012, was the 2013 USAID Youth Policy, which also embedded some initial language about systems, but really took the learnings from EQIP 3 and also EQIP 1 and EQIP 2 to build the first ever youth policy, which is now being, I think, updated and will be coming out soon. From that work, I was currently then at AED, which is now FHI 360, and worked with EDC and other partners on that. It was clear that systems were a major, I'd say, both stumbling block and opportunity, the focus on them to be strengthened and reformed to really address the needs of young people, both their strengths and what they needed to succeed. So unless we were going to focus more on systems, we would probably all be here 30 years from now thinking, what do we need to continue to do? So Claire Ignatusky and I, Claire was at USAID, we began talking to our friends in various organizations, certainly around DC, which are included on this slide, and said, could we create a space where we could come together while competitors to try and learn from each other about the work that we're doing related to systems change? And these organizations have been working together since 2018 in what we're calling the Youth Systems Collaborative, which is trying to focus on really robust learning across domestic US and international work. So we host regular learning exchanges. We meet regularly once a month. We've been generating evidence to contribute to the knowledge base about youth systems change. We have a framework that you're going to be learning about today and other tools. And we've also been advocating for youth systems change with various donors and other partners. So one of the organizations that's a part of this slide is the Global Opportunity Youth Network. So we can go on to the next slide. And who you're going to be hearing from today. And this is a multi-stakeholder initiative, and it's committed to creating place-based systems for and shifts for youth economic opportunity. They're working with anchor partners in communities around the world to create economic mobility for opportunity youth. And that's defined as young people between the ages of 15 and 19 who are out of school, unemployed, or working in informal jobs. So this is a multi-sector collaboration, and the participation is really focused on designing solutions and systemic change. So there are currently 9 communities and anchor partners around the world that are part of the Global Opportunity Youth Network, which was initiated through the Aspen Institute. And now there are these other partners you see down at the bottom that are working, and the communities range from Mexico City to Bogota to Mombasa to Pune in India. And there are several communities who we're going to be hearing about today, one in particular in India from our colleague. So I'm going to now hand it over to Claire Ignatusky.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks for that introduction and that sort of grounding of where we've been and where we are now. And so I'd like to start just with a kind of quick reminder that we're really moving from project-oriented focus to a systems focus. And so a project lens means controlling inputs and looking for outputs and outcomes in a more or less linear fashion. Whereas in a systems perspective, we're involved in the less predictable process of building sustainable, equitable systems that are locally owned. This is really a more realistic view of that takes into account the messiness of the change process, including many variables and diverse stakeholders with different interests and perspectives, usually across multiple sectors. So how do we make sense of this kind of work? It really helps to have a framework. A framework is helpful in two ways. It helps us visualize a complex situation by showing what some of the component parts are and how they're interrelated, interconnected together. And then secondly, it gives us a common mental model that can be shared to facilitate collaboration across diverse sectors and contexts. And so the youth systems framework is built from a literature review of a domestic US and international experience in comprehensive community change efforts that have occurred over the past 40 years or so. So evidence comes from the New Futures Initiative of the 1980s, Harlem Children's Zone, Strive Together, and Collective Impact, to name a few. And this framework is harmonious with the well-known iceberg model, except that it includes a few development practice areas, just as a quick reminder of what the iceberg model of systems looks like. So our framework, our youth systems collaborative framework, has 3 levels that I'll go into in more detail, and also Anu will comment on from her experience in India. But it begins with domains on the outer edges of the circle, and these are spaces where systems change plays out. Stakeholder collaboration, which are the relationships among systems actors. And we call this the heart of the matter. And then enablers, which are the actions that we take to understand and nudge the system to change. Now for a closer look, the domains. So policy is at the top, and it includes laws and standards and regulations that make up the formal system that affects youth. Sometimes good policies are in place, but they're not implemented well. Services includes opportunities, supports, networks, and information, all that youth need to become successful. Practices and practice refers to the behaviors of those who are either directly in contact with youth, such as teachers and family members, as well as indirectly affect them through institutions. Norms and mindsets are positioned at the bottom because they're often deeply held and invisible. They are the core, they are the values, cultural models, habits and beliefs that underlie policies and practices. For example, gender norms are often deeply held, and but with effort can be shifted. Resources refers to the financial and in-kind investments needed to support youth. So no single actor is entirely responsible. It's a shared responsibility across many institutions. So although these domains are depicted as separate, they're actually interconnected. For example, policy shapes how services are delivered, and norms and mindsets inform policy. So by necessity, our work toggles across these multiple domains. So at this point, I'd like to call on Anu to share some experiences from a couple of these domains. Anu, I think you wanted to start with policy.
Yes, thank you so much, Claire. So I'll just start off by saying that I work with the Global Opportunity Youth Network, and we have been working on a lot of these system shifts that you've been talking about as well. Before we get into that, though, I just want to take a quick 10 seconds to talk about why we're calling the initiative the name that we are. It's essentially the global network because it's across the world, as the name suggests, and it's opportunity youth because we want to move away from the nomenclature of calling young people disadvantaged and disconnected, and instead using asset-based framing to say that these young people are opportunity youth and they might be out of education and work and things like that, but given the right kind of background and supports, they are opportunities to essentially carry society forward because they are the young people in our society. So that's essentially what the GeoWine is. And I have been supporting the GeoWine across the 3 India communities that we have, as well as supporting some global themes across all of our communities. And what I specifically want to talk about is one of our rural India communities today, because we've been able to make a lot of headway in terms of just multiple domains that Claire, you mentioned. And one example that I want to start with is something that covers the policy as well as the resource flow domains, where we have been working with the district administration. So we've been working with the private sector and training organizations and nonprofits who are really, who understand the value of working with young people, but it's usually harder to loop in government and to loop in local administrations. And that's happened really successfully in Ramgurt, which is one of the communities we work in. And the way that's happened is that the district administration have been really excited by the fact that there's a global organization, there's a global initiative, there's money being put into youth systems change. And they started out by allocating space for young people to meet and to have kind of meeting spaces, things like that. But then it actually moved very quickly to much, much more tangible action in that they allocated funding, which was never allocated before, towards creating youth employment opportunities and towards funding the training of these young people. And they also have put in money that, and this is the district administration again, they put in money to set up a manufacturing unit of a locally found mineral that exclusively young people that are from that area will be able to work in. And this is really powerful because it goes beyond kind of like the district administration saying verbally that we support you, to actually putting their money to all of this work. And it's a really big breakthrough because once this kind of funding is allocated within the budget, it becomes much easier to kind of make it into a much more solid policy, and then it keeps happening every year. So that's something that I wanted to kind of talk about because it covered 2 of the key domains, Claire, that you spoke about, and those are really key for this kind of community here. And then one more domain that I wanted to cover is the services and practice domain. And that's also in the same community. So this is with regards to the services that we're offering young people. And I'm not going to go through the text on the slide because there's a lot to cover. But basically, the model over here is that there are people that are rooted in the local community because it's a rural community. Some of the villages can be quite far spread, and it can be very difficult to reach these young people on a regular basis. And there is regular contact that's needed with any kind of behavior change or any kind of mindset shift work that needs to be done. And so this solution that we've used, which is the SID approach, entails young people or women from the local community itself that are trained, and their capacities are built to actually offer these kind of different services to young people. So essentially things like supporting local entrepreneurship, informing young people on the different kinds of social security policies that are available, different kinds of information that they need to access around education, employment, training, things like that. And then these SIDs are also trained to mentor and provide career guidance and skilling to these young people. So it's very, very interesting because it's a community-based and a local person that's actually reaching out to young people, rather than young people having to go to a center that might be really far away, or that might not be accessible, or they might be hesitant to go to. And this is something that's a very sustainable solution for youth, because it provides them services at their doorstep.
Thank you, Anu. That's helpful to see these different kinds of services interconnected. So let's turn to the stakeholder collaboration, which I think you've started to refer to already. So these are really the relationships among core stakeholders who are responsible for the infrastructure, and this is a term that we use figuratively, the infrastructure that youth need to succeed. So typically this would be government, the private sector, NGOs, community groups, and of course youth themselves are systems actors and stakeholders. So under the right conditions, they're able to overcome what we call problem blindness, to begin to create new solutions and to commit to taking steps towards meaningful change. Backbone organizations or intermediaries really help facilitate this collaboration. So maybe calling on you, Anu, again, can you talk to us a little bit about stakeholder collaboration?
Yes, absolutely, Claire. So I'm going to stick with Ramgurt as the community example, because I've worked really closely with them. And that is a really good example of various different kinds of stakeholder collaboration. So the idea over here is, how do you kind of ensure a system shift beyond the phase of program funding? So what happens after GOYN kind of exits a community? How does that initiative, or how does that change remain sustainable, or how does it stay? And the idea is to really institutionalize that change and make sure that there are local players that are included. And so what we're doing is essentially we are bringing together. So for example, when we visited Ramgurt for the first time, we realized that the local factory owners, for example, had never gone into the district office to say that we need these kind of job profiles that are open for employment. And on the other hand, the district administration had open profiles that were kind of mapped to them for young people that were looking for jobs, but that weren't matched. So it was essentially people in the same space, in the same district, that had never spoken to each other, and there was a clear match. And the idea really is to have kind of structured collaboration that happens, and it becomes much easier when there's kind of like a structure that's put together. So the way it's designed in Ramgurt is that there's a core working team, which is Claire, the backbone organization that you kind of referred to, which is a local nonprofit. And then it's supported by much larger international NGOs like the Global Development Incubator and Accenture Development Partners. And then there's, so that's the backbone organization that kind of like really holds the entire initiative together and really drives the implementation and the strategy. And then there's a slightly wider, there's the core collaborative, which essentially consists of a multi-stakeholder advisory board and a youth advisory board. That's the two dark blue kind of squares that you can see. And the multi-stakeholder advisory board is really interesting because it has people from local NGOs, it has people from India level and global NGOs, it has people from local government, it has people from the central government, it has people from industry, it has CSR heads, it has people from academia. And so it's just all of these very, very diverse stakeholders coming together and sitting at the same table and really bringing forward their perspectives on what the youth employment gap is. So that's one part of the advisory board. There are also young people that are part of the multi-stakeholder advisory board. So it's not that we are not including young people in the decision-making and the strategy process. And then we also have a youth advisory board, which is exclusively young people across gender, across, and because it's the India context, it's across castes. So it's different castes that are represented on this youth advisory board, of people that are really brought together and encouraged to not only articulate their problems, but also talk about their aspirations, the aspirations of their peers, things like that. And then we have specific, what you see the pink rectangles to be, working groups. So for example, we have an entrepreneurship working group, we have a value chain working group. And so these are kind of subject matter experts who will be able to provide very, very concrete solutioning and very concrete kind of support on specific technical work. Post which there's the extended collaborative, which has other nonprofits, which has other training organizations, things like that, and that's essentially people who are involved in the process at an event level. So they will attend a few events in a year, they will provide their inputs in like workshops and things like that. And then the gray circle that you see is the wider youth employment ecosystem, which is then impacted because of the work of all of these different levels of the collaborative. So that's how we've shaped it in Ramgurt. It's also very similar to the other global communities. And the idea over here is really to bring, not only bring people to the same table, but it's also to get them to see eye to eye on initiatives and on kind of issues that are usually sensitive to talk about, and just kind of work towards a solution rather than work in silos and have kind of like repetitive programs or have very, very wide program gaps because of the lack of communication.
Thank you, Anu. I really appreciate sort of this laying out of a thoughtful approach to different levels of collaboration. You know, when we talk about being inclusive and also bringing together very diverse stakeholders, and really the strength is in the diversity, it still requires, and you've shown this, a well thought through and, you know, well articulated collaboration infrastructure, I would say.
And
So
then,
thanks for that. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Just a quick point that I want to make is that these groups meet regularly, especially the multi-stakeholder advisory board and the youth advisory board. They meet regularly. And that's been really important because they've been able to kind of navigate, and I'm going to use COVID as the example because they've been able to navigate this crisis really well, because it's just very interesting to see. So if you speak about something like mental health, because Ramgurt had a lot of young migrant workers that had to come back to Ramgurt very, very suddenly. They had migrated out into cities and they had to come back to Ramgurt very suddenly. And just to talk about the issues that they were facing, the lack of employment, and a very concrete example would also be the fact that there's a large conversation that's starting up on mental health. And that's been really interesting to be a part of because young people have finally, for the first time, I think, had the space to talk about this because they know that this is kind of like a safe space that they can talk in, as well as having just different. So if you can just imagine kind of like people in the industry that have multi-billion-dollar CSR budgets, and then people from really small NGOs coming to the same table and kind of talking about mental health of young people that have had to distress migrate. That's just been a really powerful movement, and it's been very useful to meet periodically because we're able to bring issues to the table and then also kind of offer solutioning and programming that can be done on an immediate basis to address immediate challenges, but then also on a system shift basis to kind of prevent this from happening the second time there's a pandemic or the second time there's a global crisis.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. So let's move on to the last set of elements of the framework, and that's the enablers. So these are actions that we take to nudge the system to change. So beginning with vision and goals, a vision is a shared image of what we would like to see created with and for young people. And it's backed by high-level goals that concretize what success looks like by setting targets that are measurable. They are jointly held across the entire network of partners and are the glue, so to speak, that holds the collaborative, allows the collaborative to work together. Systems mapping it recognizes the fact that we can't improve or change a system until we understand it, including its gaps, unintended consequences, power imbalances, and dysfunctions. Systems mapping can be more or less formal learning process, but it must be participatory. Capacity development involves helping individuals, organizations, and networks of actors be able to adapt their practices as new information emerges and conditions change. So technical knowledge is not the only capacity needed, but also a range of leadership and facilitation skills, which are best built in a safe space through hands-on experiences, coaching, and peer exchange. So in the last one, data, learning, and evaluation are critical to systems change. A resilient system is one in which actors value knowledge, data, and evidence and apply them continuously to the change process, be it through incremental improvement to practice or advocacy for policy reform. So Anu, I'll call on you to talk about one or more of the enablers.
Sure, Claire. So I'll speak about the vision and goals, but then also overlapping with the systems mapping, because I think those are very, very interlinked when we kind of worked in all of these communities. The idea really over here, so one of the core GOI tenets, to back up a little bit, is the centricity of youth voice, so that youth voices are the center of programming, and the tenet is nothing about us without us. So it's not, so we're not programming at youth, we are programming with youth. And so they have been included in kind of building out this theory of change. It's not kind of built out in our air-conditioned rooms in our Bombay and Delhi offices. It's kind of built out with all of the young people that we work with. And the idea was really to kind of have this this North Star of a vision and a goal, but then also to break it down into very, very tangible and achievable kind of goals that we could achieve over a period of 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, etc. And the idea is really to be able to reach saturation in each community. So instead of spreading impact wide, we're spreading impact, we're going deep with the impact. And how do you reach saturation in each community that you're working in, such that there's a tipping point which leads to systems change. So at some point, there's going to be enough people, there's going to be enough of a movement that there will be a systemic shift in how things work and how these services services are offered, what the policies look like, etc. So that's how the theory of change was really built out. And if we look at the vision quickly, I'm not going to go through the entire slide, it's very, very heavy. But if you look at the vision, it says that every young person in Ramgurt is an agent of positive change. And so the idea is to really reach out in some form or the other. So we can't change everyone's lives drastically, but to impact every young person in some way or the other, whether it's light touch or whether it's intensive programming. And then if you look at those very, very ambitious numbers, it says 100% opportunity youth have access to information, counseling and support services, and 75% opportunity youth in the district have access to livelihoods. We've kind of taken that very ambitious and very lofty goal and kind of broken it down. If you look at the center of the screen, the pathways, and we're looking at it kind of backwards, and we're saying how many young people can each livelihood pathway absorb. So we're saying that Ramgurt can absorb 75,000 entrepreneurs, for example. There can be 75,000 young people practicing high value agriculture. Because there are very few formal jobs, 35,000 young people can be placed in formal jobs. So we're kind of like looking at these numbers and adding up backwards to see how are we reaching all of the young people in Ramgurt at the 75% tipping point. And one more thing that I would like to point out is that because we have these kind of specific pathways around entrepreneurship, agriculture, formal jobs, etc., then there's programming that's done around how do we kind of have young people become entrepreneurs, or how do we have young people practice high value agriculture. So what are the different interventions that are needed? What are the kind of market linkages that are needed? What are the kind of, what is the future of work look like? What is the kind of investments that are being planned by the public and the private sector within that location? And to know all of that, to be able to make informed and data-driven programming decisions is when the second enabler that you mentioned, Claire, that comes in, which is the systems mapping, which is the ecosystem mapping. So with all of our GeoWine initiatives, what we've done is, including in Ramgurt, we've worked with consulting partners, and because Accenture is a global partner for the GeoWine, we had an Accenture team actually come in for a period of about 5 months and really map all of these different things out. So what are the market linkages? What is the future of work? What are the investments? What are the different kinds of really high value entrepreneurship kind of streams that young people can follow? What are the gaps in agriculture that need to be fulfilled in order to make agriculture aspirational? Things like that. So there was a very detailed mapping that was done, and the Accenture consulting team led it. But there was also input from again local NGO partners, young people. And young people contributed not only kind of information and data, but they also took part in data collection. So we had young people actually go out into communities and talk to their peers and collect this information. So to build out this kind of the goal and the visions, we've used a very data-driven kind of method, which included ecosystem mapping.
Thanks. This is a very rich slide, and you've really sort of explained how these enablers connect with one another, vision and goals connected to the analysis that you did, and then the connection to the services. So at this point, we're moving towards our question and discussion time. I think there's quite a bit to discuss from this. This is really just a quick taste of the youth systems framework, and I encourage you to get the fuller description in the article from the Journal of Youth Development. You can get the article from the website, or you can email me, and I'm happy to send it to you. It also contains examples from all different regions of the world, and in various sectors, including ones that we haven't touched on much today, which is violence prevention, security issues, as well as technical and vocational training for young people. And so we're eager to hear your reactions and questions. So I'll turn it over to Christy to facilitate some of these questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, first of all, Bonnie, Claire, and Anu for this presentation. Very interesting. I always learn something new when I see the framework. I've seen it presented before, but always appreciate seeing it again, because I always pick up something different each time. And of course, with Anu's very helpful examples, that always makes a framework like that kind of come alive, and we get a sense of what it looks like on the ground. So I'm happy to see any questions that you might have in the chat. I believe you can also just come off of mute and ask any questions you might have. Let me go back to one that I think was answered, but I think it could be helpful to elaborate a little bit on this. And Anu, it was with regard to the example that you gave of the multi-stakeholder groups that you discussed, the working groups, and I think you talked about those really effectively and gave a sense of who the members were. But maybe you could talk a little bit about any challenges and barriers for bringing all those different kinds of stakeholders together in one room to build consensus, as you mentioned in your talking points.
Yeah, so I think a very early learning was that it's one thing to bring people to the same table, and it's another thing to get them to see eye to eye. But I think that happens slowly because we have a really effective backbone organization who's really a trusted and a respected member of that community. So I think that's a really key point. That is something that I think any initiative can focus on, that the backbone organization or the facilitator is a trusted, respected entity. And so everybody coming to the table will automatically provide that level of kind of respect and a deference to all of the kind of different perspectives that are coming in and the different, or sometimes even conflicting points of view. I think that was one thing. And then I think the other thing is that just all of the people that we're working with, even if it's, and I think that the government officials are the slightly separate stakeholder in this matter. But everyone kind of is working towards the same goal, even though the approach and the means can be different. And so just that as a reminder is a really powerful kind of methodology and a really powerful tool to make sure that we're talking about what really needs to be done and focusing on that. Because we all want our young people to be employed at the end of the day. So that's what people focus on, and that's how kind of some of the friction, some of the differences in points of view are addressed. And the other thing that I want to point out is that it's also been really powerful having young people speaking to all of these people that or sitting at the same table with all of these people that have very influential positions either in government or in the private sector or even from really large nonprofits. And they've been really shy to start with, but then they've been encouraged to not really speak in bullet points about what their hopes and aspirations are, but to really tell their stories. And because they've done that, they've been able to speak with confidence about their life journey. They've also slowly become more vocal and they've become more confident to speak at these platforms, which has then also led to them being able to talk to different members in their communities. It's also led to them going to global GeoWine conferences, speaking over there. And then that also kind of has created a little bit of shift in their career trajectory, because then they've been asking us, how do we take part in kind of like the social impact movement? How do we become leaders of the community? So it's not only about kind of getting a job and that, it also kind of widens their horizons. So it's just, it's a difficult process, but it really helps because there's a trusted convener and a facilitator, and it's a safe space for everyone. And that's the most important thing.
Thank you for that. Really helpful information to have, for those of us who work with youth, kind of the idea of ensuring that they have the skills and agency to be empowered to work in those groups is really important. Bonnie and Claire, is there anything you wanted to say further on stakeholder collaboration? I see we do have a hand up and I'll move to that, but I just wanted to see if you had anything to add here.
I just had one comment at the sort of the level of the Youth Systems Collaborative itself, how we've worked as a group of stakeholders who are also competitors in a competitive industry, how we were able to take off that hat and put on our technical expert hats and our passion for youth hats and work together to write this article. So I didn't mention, but the article, there are 4 authors of the article from 3 different organizations, and supported by the rest of the Youth Systems Collaborative, which has 8 or 9 different organizations in it right now. So getting the feedback from the core writing group, from the wider field of the partners in the Youth Systems Collaborative, and then each of the Youth Systems Collaborative members went into their organizations and had various staff members review the paper and provide examples. So just another, this is a learning network. We're not actually implementing or funding new youth programs on the ground, but as a learning network, these same principles that we're talking about hold.
Great. Yeah, thank you. It has been, as a part of that group, it's been interesting to see it come together. And Anu said something about having a trustworthy backbone organization. And I think you and Bonnie coming together had built that kind of trustworthy center for the Youth Systems Collaborative. So Jill, I see your hand up. Do you want to go ahead and ask a question? Can you come off of mute and ask your question? There you go.
Am I there? No, I'm okay. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So thank you again, Claire and Anu. It's very interesting. And I hate to keep elaborating this point, but I'm just trying to figure out the dynamics between or among the youth advisory group as well as the stakeholders group. So do they come together and collaborate on decisions that are made, or is there a youth advisory group member that sits in on these stakeholder meetings? Or I'm just wondering if this whole effort is geared towards youth empowerment and youth agency. How do we ensure that the youth vision or the youth challenges and that their ideas are expressed in the overall objectives and the overall vision of the collaborative? And how does that get translated or trickle up or whatever, so that it's a shared vision and it's not just the stakeholders who are kind of watching over the youth? Do you understand what I'm saying? How do we ensure that the youth, that it really is youth focused, youth and youth centered, and actually youth driven?
Sure. Should I take that? Great. So that's a really good question, Jill, and we've actually been grappling with this as well. And so the process that we've kind of figured out is that the young people, so the youth advisory group meets, and it's facilitated by people that's with Youth Build International. That's one of the GEO1 global partners. And so they know youth work really well, and they help facilitate these sessions because it's often much more difficult to draw out conversation points from young people. So they either have a narrative in their head, which they become used to kind of repeating over and over because different organizations keep going to these communities and working over there. So to really kind of like scratch past the surface and get to the core of kind of challenges that they're facing, systemic barriers that they're facing, systemic and structural injustices that they're facing, it takes a lot of time to kind of get that conversation going. And so there are separate sessions that I held with the youth advisory group. But at the same time, there are also two representatives of the youth advisory group. So for example, in Ramgurt, we have two representatives of the YAG that sit on the multi-stakeholder advisory board. So they are then able to, and they actively kind of speak to their peers in the rest of the advisory group and say, we have a meeting with these people in the next week. What are the points that we should be discussing, and what are the kind of key things that we should be covering? And so, so it's not only kind of youth voice that's engaged and that's included in these meetings, but it's also kind of like sessions that, so like I was explaining with the theory of change as well, it's young people that have actually co-created the vision, that have co-created the goals, that have co-created the pathways with us. And they've said that this might be a really high potential pathway, but it's not really something that we want to do. So is this something that should be included then? So it's not really kind of us designing it, it's them kind of building out each step of the theory of change. And for people that are professionals in the sector, it's probably like a half day kind of consulting assignment, so to speak, to just build out something like that. But then with the young people, we have to kind of like really draw out each session. So one session is the vision, one session is the goals, one session is the pathways. So we've really kind of like co-created that with the young people, and then consolidated that into a theory of change with just informed expert opinions with the rest of the multi-stakeholder advisory. Did I answer your question?
Was that what you were looking for, Jill? You're still on mute. I think Anu will take that as a yes. Claire and Bonnie, I just wonder if you have any other examples that you want to share about how the framework has been applied, either in your own work or anything that may have gone into the article. I understand there were some examples that were elaborated in the article as well. And then we have another question after that. Bonnie, I think there's something with your microphone.
Better.
Yes.
Sorry.
Beautiful.
Thank
you.
as part of the history that Claire was saying about how we got to the Youth Systems Collaborative and looking at both international and domestic efforts, and she mentioned New Futures and the Harlem Children's Zone, these are all steps along the way. They were sort of progressive. New Futures was back in the 1980s, funded by the Annie Casey Foundation, and working in several communities to bring together collaboratives that have been described, through GOYN. And we were very early on. And what's happened over time is I think it is important. I know don't need to go back into all the history, but there are steps along the way. And I feel like we're at a whole different place right now. And there are, there are just so many efforts going on. And I think between what GOYN is doing, the examples we gave in the paper, I think we're progressing, and there's more interest in thinking about the long-term sustainability of what we're doing. And if we don't make changes at these policy and financing and collaborative kinds of levels, we're never going to get to we're all going to be sitting here 30 years from now saying, what can we be doing to change outcomes for young people? So I feel like there's more, but we all have to sort of continue to join forces and be pushing the donors and be sharing what we're doing, to raise it up and push them in the direction. And I know one of the things we'll be thinking about is some of the next work of the YSC is getting some support for doing other pieces of work that are part of our agenda, but not just doing it with one donor, about trying to bring together, hopefully, a group of donors who see this as part of what they're doing so that it isn't owned by anyone. And that's been a big part of what we've said from the beginning. This is not work of the YSC that is owned by any one organization. It will be us together trying to sort of build on what we know about systems change, because this is how it happens. So just rather than, I think it's just an important core of what we're doing and where we want to go.
Great. Thanks, Bonnie. Claire, did you want to add anything before we get to Linda's question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add an additional example to Jill's question about youth engagement, because that is such a critical area. And as Bonnie said, we've also learned from domestic US efforts. And one that really impressed me is still ongoing. It's a 10-year, $1 billion effort funded by the California Endowment. If I have it correctly, it's called Building Healthy Communities. And it's really about looking at power and how marginalized communities being able to be at the table for policy discussion and defining for them what health is really more effective than any kind of medical device or particular service. And the youth engagement piece was impressive in that the young people that are involved with the initiative in maybe 14 different sites around California substantively changed and defined and shaped the strategy at the highest level. And so, for example, the young people said, nobody's talking about what's happening in schools, that by missing, there's mental health issues that young people are dealing with. They miss school, then they're suspended, then they end up in the pipeline to prison eventually. And they say, this is our health issue. This is, changing the disciplinary practices in school changes our health status for our lifetime. And so that's an example of how youth engagement really substantively changed or shaped the highest level strategy for the initiative.
Great, thanks for that, Claire. Linda, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Christy. My question was more about the sustainability piece. I was wondering if there was any type of early signs of sustainability in some of these activities that have been implemented, or if we are thinking that some of these working groups or value chain groups, gender safe spaces would sustain themselves after the project is over? My question, maybe Anu can you say?
Yeah, Anu, we just have a couple minutes if you could maybe address that fairly quickly.
Super quick.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes. So, Linda, yes, we are looking at program sustainability. That's why we want to make as many assets as possible community owned. And so there's a concept of youth fellows, which are young people that are graduates from within the community who kind of slowly take on leadership roles and drive these initiatives. So that's from a program continuity perspective, and then also kind of creating these physical spaces that are provided by local administration and that are able to be sustained even without kind of corporate and private funding. So that's kind of one of the key tenets that we're looking at for sustainability.
Great. Thank you so much, Anu. Matthew, I'm going to pass it to you to do our quick closeout.
Great. Thank you, Christy. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Anu, Bonnie, and Claire for this great discussion. Systems, as we know, takes time, flexibility, patience to see results. And a lot of work has been done and certainly much more ahead. I want to encourage everyone who's joined us today, and many of you are youth programming experts and have expertise, to contact SID if you're interested in being a co-chair. This is I've been 3 years in this role. It's been fantastic. Provides a platform for membership to engage in topical issues and discussions for us around youth. There's a lot happening with the recent Youth SDG Summit. You heard about the revised USAID policies, this GOYN work and systems. There's a lot going on. So it's an exciting moment. Maybe to get you a little excited is, during my time as co-chair, we covered a lot of themes, and each providing a platform for young people to speak and to share their lived experiences and to be at the center of the discussion. And the majority of panelists, if not all of them, are young people. We talked about not just USAID youth policy and systems change, but how they're achieving the SDGs through sport, how the importance of bringing youth voice into violence prevention activities, how young women leaders are achieving economic opportunity through agriculture, how they're advancing family planning and elevating youth voice in those efforts. So there's a lot that you can do. And we and with Christy over the last year or two have done work, and whoever comes after will continue to elevate the key issues that are front and center. So I wanted to sort of leave on that note. And lastly, thank Christy Olenek here, Kristen Brady before, who I worked with over the last several years, Paul Sherman from SID, and now we have Malavika, who's helping with important backstopping support in this group. So I wanted to leave it at that. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and look forward to staying in touch and hopefully getting some of you involved. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy your days.
Thank you.
Thank you.